Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for your time. This is the TMFD Half Hour Motorsports Show. Welcome in, everyone. It's that time of the year again. It's officially Speedweek at Daytona International Speedway. And being one of the most important weeks of the NASCAR Cup Series season, we'll be going especially in depth this week, going over all sorts of every session, who's to watch out for, and the various important storylines to look out for this week as we get underway for the Great American Race and one of the most important weekends of every NASCAR season. Good day, everyone. I'm your host, TMFD, and with this morning's first practice session underway, we now have some semblance of data to go off of for tonight's first qualifying session and for the rest of the week. It was mostly single car runs this morning, with the exception of the last 10 minutes, where a small group of vehicles, mostly Toyotas, went into a drafting pack with each other. This greatly impacted their speeds and benefited them greatly, as the top five is consisted of most of those that went out in that pack. One of the most important examples and notable examples of someone that got a massive benefit from this would be Chandler Smith. It was mentioned on broadcast that Chandler Smith had gone out previously by his lonesome and had only achieved a 40th fastest time out of the 42 starters at the time. However, when he hooked up with the pack that consisted of Bubba Wallace, Ty Gibbs, and John Hunter Nemechek, his time increased greatly, and now he finished the session fourth fastest. This is crucial because Smith is driving for Carl Long's team, the Garage 66 entry, which at present is not typically known for being fast, unfortunately. But it serves as a great confidence booster, and if nothing else, serves as a great stat line to talk about during Media Day later. Speaking of this pack, Denny Hamlin was the quickest of the drivers that took the practice times this morning, being first with an average speed, with a fastest time, of 187 miles per hour. Fastest time of 48.005. Trailing not that far behind him was his driver at 23:11, Bubba Wallace, and then Ty Gibbs for Joe Gibbs Racing. Then the aforementioned Chandler Smith, and then John Hunter Nemechek. Rounding out the top 10 would be Riley Herbst in the 35, another new entry this season for 23:11 Racing, and one of the two rookies in the field competing for Rookie of the Year honors. Then it's Daniel Suarez, Noah Gragson, Eric Jones, and Kyle Busch rounding out the top 10. Important note about Noah Gragson, as I check my notes here, Noah Gragson possessed the fastest average overall speed today with a 48.84, but he was not the person with the fastest 5-lap averages, 10-lap averages, 15-lap averages, or 20-lap averages. That went to Ty Gibbs, who consistently raked in all those numbers. Now, who's to say that this wasn't of benefit from being in that pack all day? I'll let you be the judge. But we've got a lot of speedy cars here this week, and it's going to be very, very interesting to watch qualifying tonight. Taking a look at some trends from previous years, what we see is, as always, you can never discount the Hendrick cars when it comes to qualifying here at Daytona. Alex Bowman especially is always one to watch out for qualifying, given how often he seems to love being on the front row. Even if that streak was broken last season and he had a disappointing starting position, he's never one to discount looking forward. Now, that being said, Bowman finished the session today 20th. So not entirely indicative. He only ran 3 full laps in this morning's practice session, but Bowman is always one to watch out for, as are the rest of the Hendrick cars. They always succeed when they come here to this venue. None of them made it into the top 10 this morning, but that's not necessarily indicative of success for tonight. Since the next gen era began, two out of the last 3 poles have been won by Hendrick drivers. Kyle Larson back in 2022 and Alex Bowman back in 2023. This trend got bucked back in 2024 with the advent of Joey Logano and Michael McDowell stealing the front row away. But The Hendrick cars are never ones to sneeze on for this sort of session. Adding on to that, in recent years, the Fords have been ones to look out for, especially Team Penske, with Joey Logano making the Final 10 shootout the past 2 years and taking the pole last year. Michael McDowell shocking everyone with a front row motorsports appearance last year. But Logano's not the only one, as Austin Cindric has also made the Final 10 shootout the past 2 years here, going with an 8th position, starting 8th position final time in 2023, and with a 4th in 2024. Another team to look out for is the Wood Brothers. Harrison Burton, the past 3 years, was able to make it into the Final 10 shootout, so who's to say that that won't be indicative of Josh Berry making it in tonight? It's not, but it is a name to look out for regardless. This morning's trend doesn't necessarily indicate that the Toyotas will make it to Fast 10 tonight. In fact, it doesn't really guarantee much of anything. Last year, there were no Toyotas in sight in the top 10, and neither were there in 2023. The only Toyota that has ever made the Fast 10 the past 3 years since the next-gen car's inception was Martin Truex Jr. back in 2022. The advent of Chandler Smith getting a massive increase in his time from the draft is indicative, as without it, he would have been in the 40th fastest time, which more than likely would have fallen. The advent of Chandler Smith being in the 4th fastest time thanks to the draft help is indicative and important, as if not, he would be nowhere close to being one of the fastest cars of the session, and especially, and most pertinent, the open cars. Looking at the open cars tonight, it's going to be a very, very stacked field, as there are 9 going for 4 spots in the Great American Race, and 2 are going to get locked in tonight. What is most important is that 2 lock themselves in tonight, and 2 will lock themselves in on the duels tomorrow. Chandler Smith was the fastest open car, again by proxy of the draft help he received, and Helio Castroneves in the 91 for Trackhouse was the 2nd fastest open car today in the 12th position, with a time of 49.057, that being his fastest. He ran 13 laps this morning, just behind his teammate Ross Chastain. Then following suit would have been Martin Truex Jr. and Jimmy Johnson. Truex in this one-off appearance for Tricon Garage, reuniting with Cole Pearn, and one final hurrah with Bass Pro Shops, and the 56th, and of course the 7-time champion himself and 2024 Hall of Fame inductee. Then came the remaining 5 open cars, who, if this was a session of qualification, would have been eliminated from the 500. These being Anthony Alfredo driving for the Beard family team, Justin Allgaier in Junior Motorsports' Cup debut, what is attempting to be Junior Motorsports' Cup debut, Corey LaJoie in a part-time effort for Rick Ware Racing, and then BJ McLeod driving for himself, and JJ Yaley driving for the NY Racing team. And this is where things are going to start getting interesting tonight, as for those that for whatever reason may not be aware, a new rule instituted this year was that those that are deemed to have exceptional motorsports prowess are automatically locked into any given field if they need to qualify. This is specifically for Helio Castroneves, as if he were, for whatever reason, to not qualify on speed tonight, or not qualify through the duels tomorrow, his starting place is automatically guaranteed, and the field would be bumped up to 41 cars. This rule has stirred a lot of interesting reactions, to say the least. I will say myself, it feels disingenuous, and it feels it feels incredibly disingenuous to those that are going out of their way to qualify. And I'll use JJ Yaley as an example, as the NY Racing team the past several years has been one always up for these sorts of positions whenever there are open cars present. If JJ Yaley was to make his way through and qualify and say that they're in the same duel, say that Yaley and Castroneves are in the same duel, and for whatever reason, Yaley was to outpace and beat Castroneves, Elio would have his starting place secured regardless, and the field would be bumped up one place. Say on the flip side, however, that Castroneves were to beat Yaley, Yaley would not get that provision and would subsequently be eliminated from the race. Now, it's not a one-to-one comparison, as Castroneves is a four-time Indy 500 winner, whereas JJ Yaley is one of the most prolific journeyman drivers and one of the most long-lasting journeyman drivers that we've seen in the sport for the better part of the last 2 decades. But a more interesting comparison would be that of Jimmy Johnson. If Castroneves and Jimmy Johnson were in the same duel and were not locked and needed to race their way in, and Castroneves beats Johnson, Johnson would be eliminated from the 500, whereas Castroneves would get his way in. And this, it feels incredibly disingenuous, not only to just Johnson in general, but also to their homegrown talent. Castroneves getting a provision for his world-class status, whereas Jimmy Johnson is quite literally a 7-time champion of the sport. It feels pandering. It does, and this is not a slight against Castroneves in the slightest. If he qualifies his way in on his own provision, whether it be tonight or through the duels, by all means. But if he does not qualify his way on speed, it should be the same for him as it is for everyone else. And you know, it's unfortunate that it's come to this point, or that this is a rule that's in place now, as it is not a fair play to the rest of those. It's not a fair play to the rest of the open cars that are qualifying their way in tonight, attempting to qualify their way in tonight, and it's not fair for those that are in the duels, knowing that they have to, that even if they finish ahead of Castroneves, should he not qualify his way in tonight, then it's effectively menial because he's going to be guaranteed a spot in regardless. But it's going to be an interesting fight nonetheless, as this is the most open cars that we've had in a number of years. It's not as many as the days of 2007, where we had 61 drivers attempting to qualify for the field, but days like 2015, where we had, if I remember correctly, 6 drivers have to go home. And it was, it makes, this is the sort of thing that adds more excitement to the duels and why they're here in the first place. Not to say that the last number of years have not been exciting with only 4 cars going for 2 spots. But it's going to make these next duels and these next 2 days especially interesting. Which now brings up the question of who is likely going to make it through. Well, and that's difficult to say, as it's from a metrics standpoint and from an equipment standpoint and from a talent standpoint, the answers are rather obvious. I feel. Jimmy Johnson, Martin Truex Jr. are, in my opinion, should be locks, but that's never a guarantee, because as we saw last year, Johnson was not able to lock his way in through qualifying and almost got eliminated through the duels if it wasn't for a bonsai last lap move that barely secured him into the 500. On the plate tracks, it's never ever a surefire guarantee as to who could make their way in. If you ask my personal opinion, and I'm doing my best to not allow any in-rooted bias in when I say these things. But based off today, I think that Elio Castroneves has a good shot of locking himself in tonight. Not making the Fast 10. I don't think we're going to go that far. But I think with the speed that Elio showed and with his openness and awareness of the vehicle, I think that Casper Neves has a very, very good shot of making it in tonight. And it's now a toss-up between Truex and Jimmy Johnson. And Truex only ran 1 lap today, whereas Johnson ran 18. And it's going to be, it's going to be very, very interesting to watch, as these are both champions of the sport. Champions in their own rights. However, Johnson has, my inward bias is leaning me towards Jimmy Johnson, but I do not wish to discount Truex in any capacity. But Legacy Motor Club is now on their 4th year of operation in this under this current banner. Their 5th year as a team, as dating back to the Petty GMS days. But Legacy Motor Club has more establishment under their feet. Tricon Garage, this is their first attempt at a Cup race, and I'm not going to discount them, as they have shown that they're a top tier team, but in the truck series. Success may not necessarily translate over, which is why I'm not throwing Justin Allgaier into the ring just yet, as we don't know for certain how things are pan out. I am more than willing to accept that I'm going to be wrong on this one, but I would feel much safer saying that Jimmy Johnson could lock himself in tonight as opposed to Martin Truex Jr. Which then brings us to the remaining 7 drivers that are going to be fighting for their dual slots. And, pending how the duels go, you never know who might end up getting crashed out. You might not know who ends up getting a mechanical issue. And it's hard because there's a lot of good stories in these open cars today. Anthony Alfredo was able to make the race last year, and it was a very, very feel-good story. It's always a feel-good story when the Beard family is able to qualify for the 500. Justin Allgaier and Martin Truex Jr. are attempting to have their first Cup debuts for Tricon and for Junior Motorsports, but also Martin Truex Jr. is now on his 21st attempt at trying to win the Daytona 500. And it is one of those deals where it would be an absolute feel-good story if he were to make the race. And we know what Truex is capable of at this track. And he's come up so close time and time again. Almost won 2016 before Denny Hamlin just barely snuck that away from him. And so it's going to be a battle of feel good and want versus realism. And I'm not trying to discount either Tricon or Junior Motorsports at all. But it's going to be interesting to watch what ends up happening. And then of course we have Corey LaJoie, BJ McLeod, and JJ Yeley driving for our perennial backmarkers of Rick Ware, BJ McLeod, or Live Fast Motorsports, and NY Racing. Yaley has something to prove, especially with that team, as they just came up short last year. I know that that's on their minds. BJ McLeod is always one to look out for the backmarkers. And then Corey LaJoie, in this third car that Rick Ware has here this weekend. I beg your pardon, the 15 is not here. This second car that Rick Ware has here this weekend. It's a lot of interesting storylines tonight. Tonight and Thursday. As I keep reiterating, I apologize. Given past success and given what can and will happen, I have no reason to posit that Martin Truex Jr. will miss the race. If he somehow does, that's going to be very, very shocking. But crazier things have happened in these duels and in this qualifying format. But Truex should be a lock for a 500 appearance today. And I do not see any reason why he would miss the race unless he just gets a massive stroke of bad luck. Now, this final locked-in entry is it's difficult to decide, and I'm tossing around two names right now. Um, because names could be these drivers could all take advantage of the draft and could absolutely race their way into the field. But truth be told, I do not foresee, and this is unfortunate to say, I do not foresee JJ Yaley, BJ McLeod, Corey LaJoy, or Chandler Smith making the 500 this year. And it's unfortunate because I know that this race means a lot to those small car teams, and especially with what Carl Long had to go through to even get here again with the Mike Wallace debacle. But I do not foresee those four cars with any realistic chance of making it into the 500 unless something happens. So that leaves now Justin Allgaier and Anthony Alfredo. Allgaier has not raced the 500 in 2 years. Beg your pardon. Allgaier has not raced the 500 in more than a decade now. His last start came back in 2015 when he was driving for the H. Scott Motorsports operation. Back when that had a Cup Series program. And back when that team still existed. That's not to say he's not been keeping himself busy, as we just saw. He's won. He's a Cup Series champion now, and that is nothing. I beg your pardon. He's an Xfinity Series champion now. And has been keeping himself very, very spry, very, very young. He's not foreign to victories, especially not at this track. He won the Summer Daytona event in the Xfinity Series back in 2013. But we also don't know how well this operation is going to fare, and moreover, how the draft is going to fare. Whereas with Anthony Alfredo, he was able to take this small operation and make it in last year. And some could claim luck on that, but you need luck in this sport. You really, really do. And from a pure feel-good perspective, it would be nice. It would be lovely to see Alfredo lock his way in again. On the flip side of that, it would also be phenomenal for Junior Motorsports and for Dale Jr. as an owner for the first time in the Cup Series, because we've been clamoring for years for Dale Jr., for Junior Motorsports to make the step up to the Cup Series, and it's finally here. It's a difficult decision, as I'm partial to both, and both present phenomenal story opportunities. But it would be disingenuous to discount Justin Allgaier and Junior Motorsports. As much as this would blow for Anthony Alfredo, I feel as though ultimately he's going to get outdone, and unfortunately, this is going to boil down to it's an equipment disparity. It's an equipment disparity, and also Allgaier has far more experience than Alfredo at these tracks, and has been going at this for much longer. I feel that Allgaier is going to use that experience to his advantage and claim that final 40th starting spot. But who's to say? Who's to say? This could be completely wrong, and I'm willing to accept that I could be wrong. But it's going to be interesting to watch these duels later on, and see just how much things could pan out, or things could play differently. For all we know, BJ McLeod could race his way in, and that would be phenomenal. But so is so. Moving on then, moving on to polls. Now, the front row is also locked up tonight, and we have 9 active pole winners in the field, the most of which is Alex Bowman, who has gotten poles in 2018, 2021, and 2023, as well as having an absurd amount of front row starts here at the Great American Race. Bowman is always one to watch, as are the Hendrick cars, as always. Jimmy Johnson and Martin Truex Jr. are previous pole winners here. That could play into their advantage. It also could not. And then, of course, it's going to be interesting to see where the rest of the field shakes out. Based on practice today, it looks as though that Shane Van Gisbergen and Riley Herbst have gotten acclimated very, very well. Those rookie contenders will be ones to watch throughout the entire season. But the one that I'm going to keep my eyes on the most tonight is Helio Castroneves. Was putting up very, very, very respectable lap times today. Came up just a few hundredths short of the fastest time put by his teammate Ross Chastain. And appears to be acclimatizing to this very, very well. Which is also why I say that I think he will lock his way into the field tonight. Something of note that happened during practice today is that the only Spire Motorsports vehicle that went out on track was Carson Hocevar. Justin Haley and Zane Smith, beg your pardon, Justin Haley and Michael McDowell opted to stay in the garage, and I believe, from what I remember correctly, there was some sort of technical issue on Michael McDowell's car. So they were just gathering data from Hocevar, and that'll be applicable to both Haley and McDowell tonight. We saw last year that there are a lot of issues with potential. We saw last year that there could be some issues with not going out and running, as we saw last year when Kaz Gralla had that mechanical issue right as he went out to take his lap that forced him to race his way in through the duels. But we will see what happens with McDowell tonight. In any case, he's locked in, so all that would cost him would be just to really emphasize the importance of the duels for him. But we also have long-running streaks of drivers that still don't have poles in this race. Most pertinent of which is Kyle Busch, who's attempting his 21st attempt at going without a pole position. Busch is not a stranger to the Final 10 shootout. Neither is RCR, as last year both Busch and Austin Dillon were able to make it into the Final 10 shootout. So it'll be interesting to see if really this entire weekend, if Kyle Busch is able to finally snap that streak of his that's dating back for so long. Denny Hamlin is another name that surprisingly does not have a pole position yet. In this race, this will be his 20th attempt, and he finished. His best starting spot in the 500 was a second back in 2018. Continuing the trend of drivers that have been struggling to find that top spot at Daytona, Brad Keselowski. This will be his 17th attempt at attempting to get a pole position here at the Great American Race. He has a best start of third back in 2022. And as stated previously, the Fords have been looking on an up and up with this event, but not necessarily RFK. At least not yet, but we'll see. Speaking of Michael McDowell, he also does not have a pole position yet. And speaking of last season, that's where his best start in this race comes from, with a second. But that was back when he was with Front Row Motorsports. With all the with this air of uncertainty around whether his car will be able to function properly tonight, we will see what comes of this. Another one, AJ Allmendinger. This is his 13th attempt. 13th attempt at qualifying. But it's important to note that he failed to qualify back in 2007 and 2008. So he has 11 starts in the 500 on record, but 13 attempts at qualifying for the race. And his best start is 15th 4 different times back in 2010 to 2012 and 2014. So that's the top 5 that are with. That is currently the drivers that have the most starts, the 5 highest drivers with the most starts in this event that presently do not have a pole position. So that's another thing to look out for tonight. Um, but we will see. We shall see what happens, and we shall see how everything pans out. I don't necessarily have a prediction for pole winner. As that's insanely hard to predict, especially now with the up and up that all the Fords have been getting. Um, but we'll see what happens. If I had to guess, keep your eyes peeled for the Hendrick mobiles. As always, keep your eyes peeled for the Penske cars. And don't count the Wood Brothers out either. Not necessarily for pole position, but for being one of the 10 fastest cars during tonight's qualifying session. And that'll be all from me today. Thank you all so much for your time and for listening. And we will see you tomorrow morning, where we review the qualifying session from tonight and start going more in depth with this weekend's activities. As tomorrow morning, we have the Truck Series tomorrow afternoon, we have the Truck Series making their first practice round of the season. So, thank you all so much, and have a good one.